Would I be the jerk if I backed out of reuniting with my estranged father after 12 years? This is a long story, but I need to get it out. I've been dealing with a huge decision, and it's been consuming me for days. I don't know if I'm overreacting, or if I'm trying to protect myself from being hurt again. I just need some clarity. So here goes. Throwaway account because my family uses my main account and this is really sensitive. Also, I'll be honest, I'm not great at articulating my emotions, so bear with me. This is hard to write. I'm 27F, considering meeting up with my estranged father, 50SM, for the first time in over 12 years. On the surface, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but there's a lot of history here. And some of that history is dark. My father left when I was 15, and I haven't spoken to him properly since. Our relationship wasn't just distant, it was painful. And now, after more than a decade of radio silence, he wants to reconnect. Let me start from the beginning. When I was a little kid, I actually had a good relationship with my dad. Or at least, that's how I remember it. He was the kind of dad who would take me to the park, push me on the swings, and buy me ice cream afterward. My parents' relationship, on the other hand, was a different story. They fought constantly, and I always knew that there was tension between them, even before I fully understood why. There were late nights where I'd hear raised voices through the walls and the sound of something breaking. I'd cover my ears and pretend it wasn't happening. Things escalated when I turned 10. I'll never forget one night in particular, one of the nights that changed how I saw my father forever. It was a Thursday. I was sitting in my room, trying to focus on my homework, when the shouting started again. This time, though, it was louder than usual, more aggressive. My parents were screaming at each other, and I could hear the sound of something being thrown across the room. My mum was yelling, pleading with my dad to stop. I was frozen in my room, terrified of what was happening downstairs. Then came the sound I'll never forget, the unmistakable thud of someone being hit. It wasn't just a noise, it was the kind of sound that echoed through the house, like a shockwave that rattled the walls. My heart stopped, and without thinking, I ran downstairs. My mum was on the floor, her face red and swollen, holding her cheek where my dad had hit her. She was crying, but she wasn't shouting anymore. It was like the life had drained out of her in that moment. I'll never forget the look in my dad's eyes. There was no remorse. No guilt, just anger. Pure, unfiltered rage. He didn't even notice me standing there, frozen in the doorway, watching the whole thing. My mum caught my eye, and I could see the panic on her face when she realized I had seen everything. "Go back upstairs, honey," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's okay, just go." But it wasn't okay. It was never okay after that. From that point on, everything changed. My mum and I grew closer, but the house became a battlefield. My dad wasn't just emotionally distant, he became someone I didn't recognize. He was harsh, critical, and quick to anger. Little things would set him off, and I was always walking on eggshells, terrified of what might trigger his next outburst. A few months later, my parents separated. I thought things might get better after that, but they didn't. Instead of fighting in the house, my dad moved out of state and seemed to vanish from my life. He moved to California with his new girlfriend, leaving my mum and me to pick up the pieces. My little sister, Emily, was only 8 at the time, and she didn't really understand what was happening. But I did. I knew he wasn't coming back. After he left, the few times we did talk were brief, strained, and always left me feeling worse. He never apologized for what happened that night. He never acknowledged the abuse or the way he had abandoned us. Every conversation somehow ended with him blaming me for not reaching out more. He'd say things like, "You could have called me," or, "If you wanted a relationship, you should have tried harder." It was like I was the one responsible for the fallout of our family, even though I was just a kid when it all happened. Fast forward to now. I'm 27, engaged to an incredible man, Alex, 30M, and I've built a life I'm proud of. I've done my best to move on from my dad's abandonment, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about it from time to time. I've tried therapy, tried letting go of the anger, but there's still a part of me that's never fully healed. Then, Out of the blue, I get a Facebook message from my dad. The message was short. He said he was going through some big changes in his life and wanted to reconnect. At first, I didn't reply. I stared at that message for what felt like hours, debating whether to open up Pandora's box or leave it sealed. But after a few days of agonizing, I responded, keeping it brief. I didn't know what to say to someone who had caused so much pain, someone who hadn't been part of my life in over a decade. That's when he dropped the bombshell. He's getting a divorce from his second wife and is moving back to my city. He said he wanted to make things right, that he regretted not being there for me and my sister. He asked if we could meet, maybe talk things out and start fresh. He said he'd come to terms with his past mistakes, and he wanted a chance to be in my life again. I told Alex about the message, and he was surprisingly supportive. He's always known about my complicated relationship with my dad, and he understands how much it hurt me to be abandoned. He said he'd support whatever decision I made, whether I chose to meet with my dad or not. But he also warned me to protect myself. Don't expect too much from him, he said. You need to prioritize your own mental health. So I agreed to meet my dad. We set up a time to meet at a coffee shop in a few days. At first, I felt relieved, like maybe this was my chance for closure. Maybe I could finally get the apology and explanation I'd been waiting for all these years. Maybe he'd tell me why he left, why he hurt my mum, why he didn't care enough to stay in touch with me and Emily. But the closer the meeting gets, the more anxious I feel. What if he hasn't changed? What if he blames me for everything again, like he did before? What if he's only reaching out because his life has fallen apart and he's lonely? I've spent years trying to heal, and I'm scared that letting him back into my life will undo all the progress I've made. There's another part of me that's afraid of facing him after all these years. What if I see the same man who hurt my mum? What if that anger is still there, beneath the surface? I've replayed that night over and over in my head for years, and the thought of being in the same room with him again terrifies me. I'm no longer a scared 10-year-old girl, but the trauma of that night still lingers. I've been talking to my mum about it too, and she's adamant that I shouldn't meet him. She doesn't think he's changed, and honestly, I don't blame her. She went through hell with him. She's been supportive of me and my sister all these years, and she's always been there to pick up the pieces when my dad let us down. She doesn't want to see me hurt again, and she's made it clear that I don't owe him anything. But there's this part of me that still wants answers. I want to know why he left. I want to know why he didn't care enough to stay. I want to know if he regrets what he did to my mum, and if he even remembers that night. At the same time, I'm terrified of what reopening that door might do to me. I've built a life without him. I've gotten to a place where I'm happy, and I don't know if I want to risk losing that peace by letting him back in. So, here I am, asking for advice. Would I be the jerk if I backed out of meeting my dad next week? Would it be selfish to protect myself, or am I missing an opportunity to heal? I'm scared, confused, and honestly, I don't know what to do. What would you do in my situation? TLDR, my estranged father, who left when I was 15 after physically abusing my mum, wants to reconnect after 12 years of no contact. He's going through a divorce and moving back to my city. I agreed to meet him, but now I'm terrified and unsure if I should go through with it. Would I be the jerk if I backed out?